my girlfriend at the time, and I went camping 5 hours away from home for her birthday. We made the trip the day after a big storm passed through. We left town early and got there in the early afternoon. The guy at the entrance to the campgrounds mentioned that there was no one else staying there that weekend. We were like, oh, this is going to be sick. First, we drove down these long pathways to our designated area. As we got closer to it, the road narrowed, so basically you had to back out to get out. We unloaded the car, got the tent set up, and decided to go walk around the woods. It was dead silent, but it was still bright out, so we just took in all the nature we could and walked a few miles away. We reached this point in the woods where there were some weird-looking white cabins. They were very uniform, all built the same exact way. Like, I guess they were a part of the camping grounds, but they seemed way out of the way and there was no sign of life. It felt eerie to be at like we shouldn't be there, so we turned around and walked back. We took a breather in the tent, then tried to start a fire in the fire pit. Unfortunately, neither of us had been camping before and had no idea how to start a fire. We had brought some of those self-lighting logs from Walmart and some lighter fluid, but everything else around us was soaked to the bone from the rain that had just passed through the day before. We knew we needed kindling of some sort, but any dry sticks or leaves were far and few between. Eventually we got a small fire going and ate hot dogs and marshmallows and spent some time looking at the stars. Then we noticed just how dark it was out there. My girlfriend was easily spooked and was like, "Can we get in the tent now?" So we put the fire out and crawled into the tent. We were talking to each other, but I could tell that she was tense. Suddenly she put her hand over her mouth and was like, "Shoo. Do you hear that?" Before I could respond, we heard footsteps. Like heavy footsteps. It sounded like a group of people walking. I whispered to her, "It's probably just animals or something." Then we heard mumbling. Like low mumbling. We couldn't make out words, but it didn't sound like a sound an animal would make. It sounded like words, but hushed and non-elaborated words. We sat in silence staring at each other in the dark for what felt like forever. The mumbling got louder, as did the footsteps, until it sounded like it was right outside our tent. We both froze. I don't think either of us were breathing. And then silence. We waited and waited and waited. I'm still not sure how much time passed. Eventually my girlfriend said, "We have to get to your car." The adrenaline was pumping, so I peeked out of the tent into the darkness and told her to stay behind me. Then we ran to the car. I locked the doors and she was like, "What the fuck was that? We can't stay here. No one is out here but us. What the hell?" I kept looking around for any signs of life, but we were seemingly alone. I looked at her and was like, "Okay, I'm gonna grab her stuff, you stay in the car." We only had our ice chest and our tent out. I hopped out and ran, grabbed her ice chest, tossed it in the back seat. As I turned around to get the tent, I started hearing footsteps closing in again. In a moment of pure terror, I yanked the tent off the ground, wrapped the tarp around it, slung it over my shoulder like some panicked Santa Claus, and shoved it into the trunk. I didn't say anything when I got in the car except, "Do we have everything in here?" My girlfriend said yes, and I floored it in reverse out of our camping area. Then we came to a fork in the road that went in like 6 different directions. I asked my girlfriend if she remembered which path we came down to get in here, and she told me she didn't know. We chose a random one and ended up in a different camping spot. I cursed under my breath and slammed it into reverse. Then I noticed from the angle we had exited from, I could see the main path back to the gate, thanks to a small sign behind an overgrown bush. As we hightailed it out of there, I noticed there was a single small green light out on the woods to our right, near where we had set up our campsite. We drove the entire 5 hours back to our hometown and fell asleep on my girlfriend's couch at around 4 a.m. We never talked about the trip ever again, and I haven't had any desire to camp ever since. I was camping in Northeast Ohio by myself. On the third and final night there, I woke up to piss and walked about 10 feet from my hammock, and I noticed a headlamp about 80 to 100 feet from me. I watched it for about 10 minutes. I watched it stand up and sit down. So I got my boots on and grabbed my hatchet and started to walk to the right of my campsite. I was going to find out what he was up to. I got about 50 yards from my site and started walking towards him, when I noticed another headlamp about 40 feet from me and walking around. I hit the ground and threw some leaves on me. He walked about 10 feet from where I was laying. Then he stopped, lit a cigarette, and finished his beer. After he got far enough that he couldn't hear me, I got up and started walking towards the first guy. I got close enough to him that I could hear his phone receiving messages. I moved up closer to him quietly to where I can see his face lit up from his cell phone. That's when he stood up and started walking towards my hammock. I laid there on the ground for a minute and made my way towards my site. I stopped when I started hearing my tarp that I had above my hammock being trashed. Then I could see flashlights, and then my big flashlight turned on and off. I heard my mess kit being thrown around and them talking about how he was just here. I laid on the ground and watched my flashlight walk away until it was a small dim light. When the sun came up and I returned, my whole site was destroyed. My hammock and tarp was shredded by what looked like a machete. My mess kit was stomped on. They took my backpack, rain gear, and flashlight. I went to the spot where I saw the first guy and found 2 patches, 8 empty beer cans, and an empty lighter. I walked to where I saw the other guy and found an empty bag of powder, which turned out to be meth, a mess of cigarette butts, and a pile of shit with no toilet paper to be found. This past weekend, me and my partner decided to go on our usual camping spot. It's very low-key, never usually anyone up this mountain besides 1 or 2 people at a time, and even at that time they're miles away from your campground. This past weekend, just like every year, we brought my parents' little elderly dog. We set up camp, ate some food, and drank some beer around the campsite. When we arrived prior to this, we scoped out the area to see how busy it was. There was absolutely nobody on site. The entire mountain campgrounds were entirely empty. We're used to having one hunter or fisher in the area at least, but we've never not seen one person the entire trip. So we sat around the fire completely relaxed with my little dog nearby. When we decide to get into bed, my usually very complacent pup refuses to settle inside the tent. It's pretty hot this time of year, so we had the tent unzipped with just the mesh covering the opening to let some breeze in. But my pup was looking through the mesh and sniffing, zoning in on something. We decide to get up and check out the camp for whatever he's looking at. We don't see anything, so we decide to sit by the fire and chill. When my sleepy pup unsettles suddenly with his hackle straight up on end, growling a deep growl into one direction of the woods. We decided to grab the hunting knife and axe and listen closely. He snarled and barked vigorously, which took us by surprise because he's been completely comfortable every other year. After a few hours of him acting on high alert, we decide to flip the truck lights on to illuminate our camp as we're surrounded by darkness. We were listening intently, trying to figure out what he's seeing or hearing. After a few minutes, he lays down and alarms us again a few minutes later, startling us to the point where we make a run for the truck by how aggressively he's been trying to. My dog is wanting something. We wait, our hearts pounding inside the truck, trying to see what's out there. After 30 minutes, we assume whatever it is has passed on. After we reposition ourselves in front of the fire again, my dog's hackles are up and we hear the loudest tree branch snap a mere 10 feet away from us in the pitch-black wilderness. Again, we hop in the truck with the dog and decide we better leave. As earlier that night, we were hearing wolves hunting for a few hours and their howl is echoing the woods. Our main concern was it being a cougar, as they're commonly seen in this area, and there had been a lot of attacks on unsuspecting victims. Our main thought was something was stalking us for a long time without moving on. We told my partner's parents that we decided it's better to be safe than sorry, and we were mocked extensively, but we were armed with very minimal weapons, not anything that could handle a mountain lion or a pack of wolves. We recalled chicken shits the entire weekend and mocked over it. Regardless, I'm glad to have left the campsite when we did.